grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. That is the opening line for countless Warhammer 40,000 novels, and it seems like a fitting start there as I dive into the lore of 40k. Now, I struggled for some time trying to figure out, how do I start, talking about 40k lore? There's just so much information. There's so many novels. Some of them are valid. Older ones have been retconned or kind of rewritten or reincorporated in different ways. But I ultimately decided to dive into this universe the same way I would explain it to a friend. Start with the core concepts and expand from there. And to that end, today we are talking broadly about the Imperium of Man. Now, while its full history with all the novels and everything combined is kind of a lot for one video, my goal with this one is to give you a snapshot into its current state. In the 41st millennium, mankind has spread far and wide amongst the stars. Since the present age we are in now, we have created scientific marvels, terraforming technology, starships, methods to extend mortal life into near immortality, replace limbs with advanced bionics, and much more. And despite how kind of a utopian and great that sounds, right, this advanced civilization, there is a very dark undercurrent to it. Because even though we've achieved those things, since achieving them, we have technologically regressed in a big way. What were once viewed as triumphs of science, as they rightly were, are now revered as machines and spirits. Technologies are hoarded, praised and revered as religious artifacts of a bygone era. We are past our prime as a species, and the religious and spiritual has overtaken man's thirst for advancement. Progress has stagnated entirely. Now, there's no better example of this kind of mental shift when it comes to the worship, if you will, of the Emperor. Now, there's a lot to unpack here, and the Emperor will need a dedicated lore video just to him, so that's coming in the future, but in the year 30,000, or that kind of millennia, he was the singular leader of mankind. It was he who led the massive campaign across the stars, reestablishing mankind and bringing us to the highest point that we would ever be. He is the one who established humanity as we know it in this current era of 40k. And during the terrible events of the Civil War, known as the Horus Heresy, the Emperor was struck down. He is kept alive on the Golden Throne, a massive life support machine, his psychic mind acting as a beacon for all of humanity, making space travel possible. I know it's a lot of information, but there's a lot to digest. In life, the Emperor extolled the virtue of reason and scientific advancement. Religion was nearly non-existent, but since his long ascension to the Golden Throne and the 10,000 years that have passed, mankind has regressed. His edicts, his teachings have all gone by the wayside. He is now worshipped as a deity, which is something he did not want when he was actively walking amongst humans. The worship of the Emperor is now the state religion of the Imperium, complete with its own ecclesiarchy and inquisition. And these two themes, right, the technological regression coupled with the crushing religious authoritarianism, make the Imperium what it is. And it becomes truly mind-boggling when applied to the trillions of lives that make up its citizens. We have spread almost entirely across the Milky Way galaxy. From incredibly dangerous environments on certain planets called death worlds, to densely populated hive planets where it's just teeming with industrial masses and machines and compact, cramped living spaces, the Imperium has survived millennia on the backs and blood of its citizens. Life is cheap and plentiful, and there's no problem that cannot be solved with the sheer bulk of resources, labor, and bodies that the Imperium commands. Because that's the thing, even though we've kind of fallen backwards since the Emperor won on the Golden Throne, the sheer amount of resiliency of mankind and the amount that we're willing to sacrifice for survival has kept us going, even though we're way off track from what the original vision of mankind was. Even though technological progress stops, bureaucracy does not. Taxes, tithes, military drafts all serve to keep humanity going, even though it's on the brink. It's a civilization that has lost its own history to the ravages of time. And that's a strange concept for us, because I'm in America, we're very all about our own history and the big impact that made globally. And of course, if you go to other parts of the world where they can trace their lineage and their certainly their political history back a long ways, it means a lot when there's just whole chunks of your civilization that nobody knows. It's just a mystery, even though you know political structure the entire time. And this whole civilization, right, the whole Imperium only values life so much as it can serve this emperor god deity. It's a place of mysticism, oppression, dogma, and sacrifice. Survival is the only goal as a species of mankind, and it is a horrific example at every single turn of ends justifying the means. So why is the Warhammer 40k universe so cool? If you are new to the channel and you're just jumping on with 40k stuff, I do this at the end of every single one of my lore videos. I ask the question, why is this cool? Because there's a difference between just regurgitating information and telling you why it's so significant, right? What's the feeling behind those facts? Well, if you know much about 40k lore, you know I glossed over a lot. Like I said, this is a lot to explain. I'm gonna pretend that I'm explaining it to my wife, right? Focus on giving the feel of the Imperium, this like crushing darkness and grimness of the entire setting of the Imperium, right? More than a detailed history, those videos will come later. The setting of Warhammer 40,000 is something that I've loved really since high school. I got a copy of Dawn of War from Half Price Books, and then I was so enthralled by what I was looking at that I grabbed a black library novel. And the intense darkness of the setting is incredible. And it's the stage of heroic sacrifices and strong characters and great battles. Because something can be apocalyptic, but that's just one planet amongst millions. Now, a few things about the Imperium of Man specifically that I love. The Gothic art style, right? A lot of the art is this hybrid of this, think our world past, Gothic religious architecture, but it's also infused with technology that is somehow both futuristic, but again, mankind has kind of regressed technologically, so it all looks worn down. It all looks old and scrappy, even though it's something that's far more advanced than we would ever have imagined today in the real world. Their modified use of Latin in their naming conventions only serves to help them with it, right? When you combine that kind of art style with the fact that the sheer numbers, right, in the Imperium of Man is truly mind-blowing, and it serves to let us create any kind of narrative we want. You can have a jungle-themed death world, a blackened mining planet where the air is toxic, or a cramped city planet where literally the entire planet is covered in like these big structures that are just mega cities called hives. And it's destroyed by overpopulation, right? All of it exists simultaneously, and all of it exists to serve the Imperium and specifically the Emperor. It's the setting for political intrigue, religious zeal, which if you've been a fan of the channel, you know that I'm a big sucker for any of the religious zeal, zealots, that kind of thing. It's a good setting for rebellion and heroism. Another big concept that stands out is the technological regression, right? We in our current time haven't really ever lost knowledge, right? None of us watching this YouTube video have lost significant knowledge as a species, right? It's happened in our history. We can look at kind of advancements in science and medicine, and there are points where there's great plagues that tear down most of our best and brightest, and we lose knowledge that way. But in our current information age, we haven't really gotten an idea of what this is. We haven't achieved something and then just as a species lost the knowledge of how to do it in recent times. And this is fascinating to me, right? I was explaining the setting to my wife and we both agreed, right? The idea of creating a machine, right? And then losing the knowledge of how to do so. And then you think this machine is somehow special. It somehow has a mind of its own and a spirit of its own. You begin to worship that machine that you created, as a species of course, as a holy relic in some way. It's more than just losing a blueprint. It's a collective step backward, right? History turns to legend, legend turns to myth. Innovation is regarded as heresy. We worship the old ways that we don't really understand. Right, all of a sudden your startup sequence or your oil change turns into religious rites and ceremonies. And I hope between all of that, with the art and my kind of giving you the feel for the Imperium of Man, I've painted a pretty bleak picture of the far future, and it certainly is. Now, as I said before, I'm doing this in a way that, like, this is how I would explain it to my wife and how I have explained it to her. I think it's important to start with the perspective of, like, okay, what's the most relatable thing? I understand what it's like to be a citizen, in the real world. What would it like to be a citizen in the Imperium of Man in the far future? That's a really tangible thing. You're like, okay, I get it. I get what their lives could be like. And in my next video for 40K, we're going to be talking about the warp. I feel like knowing the best perspective, like the closest perspective to where we are in the real world, is really good to help you kind of grasp what the setting is like. And then next to that, the idea of the warp is so integral to so many parts of 40K lore. Once I cover those two things, the Imperium of Man and the warp, I'm going to start diving into various factions. I feel like, I've mentioned stuff like the Horus Heresy and the Civil War that happened, and once I cover the idea of the warp, all of a sudden I can open up to just kind of referencing these types of things going forward. And so the first faction I want to cover after the warp is the Death Guard, which is exactly what I play. So friends, thank you so much for spending some time with me. If you are new to the channel and new to 40K lore, go ahead and click subscribe and follow along. I mostly do Age of Sigmar lore, but I will be dipping my toe into 40K here and there going forward. It is a vast and narratively rich world with some fantastic authors creating some of the best stories you can imagine. All with this oppressive, crushingly bleak backdrop where the only light possible is the hope that we can keep on surviving to see tomorrow. And I love it. It's grim, it's dark, it's the grim dark, it's amazing, and I hope that you'll join me. Thank you all so much for watching, and happy wargaming.